You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And welcome to Soccer Today. I'm Duane Rollins along with Kevin Laramee. Joining us on the line is our friend Kristan Heneage. He's going to talk to us about England and the Premier League and all things good over there. How you doing, Kristan?
Not too bad, thanks, chaps. How are you?
Well, as always, obviously the talking point on most people's minds around the world is the current crisis swirling around the English national team and apparently coming into the Premier League soon. Just what are your thoughts on the reports that are happening over there with Big Sam and the potential corruption that might get unearthed soon?
I think the outcome from the FA's perspective, it's a chronic punishment for the crime of essentially hiring a manager that didn't see due diligence in the process of hiring him. In terms of corruption, I think it's always disappointing when this kind of story breaks. You never really want to believe that there are people bending the rules, that there are people acting not within the best interests of the game that you either enjoy or you work in, depending on which that is. I think this will be the start. I don't think personally there are just a few culprits in this. I imagine it stems a little bit further than that. And I think, honestly, if there's a benefit or if there's an advantage or something to come out of this that is positive, it has to be potential reform. Realistically, there are people committing very similar acts that aren't deemed criminal or aren't deemed, negative or not in the spirit of the game. I mean, you look at West Ham, for example. I wrote a piece for Yahoo just last month. They signed a player, Jonathan Calleri, the Argentinian, from a club called Deportivo Maldonado. Now, Caleri's never played for Maldonado. And if anyone has heard of this club in your listener base, then I'm incredibly impressed because they're a second division Uruguayan side that draw about 200. And they're essentially considered a bridge club, which is a club that will ferry players through for the benefit of the owners, for them to see a financial gain, usually because the tax rates in Uruguay are significantly lower. I think it's 12% in Uruguay and 35% comparatively in Argentina. So there's money to be made there. Now, you would argue that's third-party ownership just in a different guise. So I think we need to reform those rules and we need to essentially redefine the boundaries and adapt with the sort of changing landscape of football.
Yeah, I mean, here in Canada, a player by the name of Daniel Henry that West Ham also signed went through a club similar to that in Cyprus. They never really touched base there. So yeah, interesting stuff. All the kind of concerning stuff is what it is. But let's move on to the pitch now. Let's start with Manchester City with their historic for them, hot start, cooled off a little bit up in Scotland this week. That loss, it felt like a loss. That draw to Celtic, was that a crack in the armor or just kind of one of those things in your mind?
I'm inclined to say a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I think certainly it wasn't their greatest performance. They did seem a little bit cold in parts. In fairness, they were playing in Glasgow. It's cold all year round there. I think in terms of the actual tactical stylings and all that kind of breakdown, I do think that Celtic did a good job of closing the right players at the right times. A lot of people will talk about playing against Guardiola and say that you just have to put pressure on them. I really don't think it's as simple as that. I think you actually have to target the right players. You have to find who are the key instigators and initiators of attacks for that team and then shut them down and make it so that they can't really play. And I think he did a good job of finding the weak spots as well, Brendan Rodgers. So I'm inclined to, as I say, I think it's a it's definitely an off night for Guardiola and co, but I also think there was just a little bit of an insight on how you can potentially play against them.
And now it leaves them with a big matchup this weekend in London against the Spurs. No Kevin De Bruyne, no Aguero. How do you approach this match if you are Man City, Kristan?
It's a match, I think, that tests your squad ever so slightly. I don't think a club of City stature can get away with saying that no De Bruyne is enough impact to stop them winning or stop them even succeeding. I think you can give the keys to David Silva a bit more. I think as he showed against Celtic, he still has the ability to find those neat pockets and those tiny spaces for the likes of Aguero. So I think you give Silva a lot more responsibility, perhaps even the role that De Bruyne has, and you maybe bring someone else rather in out wide, perhaps someone like Jesus Navas, someone that can just give you something in terms of touching the sideline and also getting to that byline and putting crosses in.
Two matches gets my attention on Saturday, Kristan. We have Swansea, Liverpool, Hull City, Chelsea, the early game, and the, for our time, 10 a.m. game, Hull and Chelsea. What is it surprising? Do you think Conte and Chelsea are going to rebound from the last week and a half of not perfect results to maybe get a victory on the road against Hull? And what have impressed you or didn't impress you with Chelsea so far this year?
I think they could get a victory at Hull. Hull for me are a bit of a mystery because we've seen them perform very well under Mike Phelan. And yet ever since he's been appointed full-time coach, it seems to have dropped off a little bit, which is a shame because I think there is the crux of a very good squad in there. It's not a world-beating squad, but I think it's got the right kind of characteristics mentally to succeed and stay up in what is a tough division this season. Whether they can actually succeed against Chelsea, I think that's a different matter altogether. Chelsea haven't really impressed me at all this season. I think they've had flittering moments where Hazard's managed to light things up. I think Conte's ability to get him firing, albeit by just removing defensive responsibility, that's been good when it's worked. I do wonder if he's going to have to game manage Hazard ever so slightly and adapt the formation so that he doesn't have those responsibilities away from home, or perhaps even withdraw him altogether. But I think overall, it's a team that, for me, needs an injection of quality. We look back to when they won the title a few years ago, just how brilliant their summer business was in terms of identifying what they need and then going out and buying it. I didn't see that same kind of diligence and that same brilliance again this summer. I saw a team that really knew what they wanted, but weren't able to get the Premier targets and had to settle for second or third, or in some instances, I would argue, fourth choice. And I said this elsewhere, that for me, buying David Luiz for what was, I think, close to 40 million just doesn't make sense. I would rather, if I'm a Chelsea fan, I would rather take maybe half of that money and buy someone that you don't really know, someone perhaps like Michael Keane or someone that just has that potential to grow as a player and yes, could still be a bust in inverted commas, but also could have the potential to succeed as well.
Kristan, I want to turn the attention to the red half of Manchester, and one of the main talking points so far this year, of course, has been the play of Wayne Rooney and whether or not, the debate goes on, whether or not he might be done, whether or not he might need a new role there. What are your general thoughts on Rooney's play and whether you think he has a significant impact role to play in United moving forward?
Well, time waits for no man, and he's not someone, at least in my opinion, that has kept good care of his body. That's one of the things I think has really caused the situation that he's in now. I think physically he's not as dynamic and rampaging as he once was, and as a consequence, it's harder to fit him into that team. It's harder to find a place for him. I think ultimately he's going to struggle, and so is Manchester United, as long as they keep putting him in that team, because he doesn't look like the player he once was. And the concern now is that he's eating up a sizable part of that wage budget every week with his salary.
This season of the Premier League has been built up as the season of the managers, with the Mourinho, with United, Ranieri defending with Leicester. We have Pep Guardiola, Man City, Conte, Chelsea. which one is in front as we speak? Is the Mourinho experiment that United shown any potential going forward, or is just Pep really taking a lead in that managerial race for the best of the year?
I think
Kristan?
We may have lost Christian there for a second. We'll try and
Sterling, I think, had hit a bit of a wall as a.
Okay, so we've lost Christian. What we'll do is we'll try and get him back on. We'll just go to a quick break right now and attempt to reconnect and continue the interview, folks.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, Open Lines After Dark, 5 Rings Daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. And we are back. Kristan, welcome back.
Hi, sorry about that. To answer the question, I think Guardiola is ahead just because of the instant impact he's had with not just the team winning, but also the players' improvement. And I think Mourinho is personally trying to fit a lot of players into only a few positions. And Man United's transfer strategy for me during the last sort of 24, maybe 36 months has been a little bit too top heavy. It's been buying too many players and not looking how those players impact the rest of the squad.
Very interesting. But when you're looking at Ibrahimovic, Pogba, Rooney, where do you see Pogba? We've seen a glimpse of success this week, but it hasn't been quite to the expectation and the hype that the transfer and the salary demands.
No, and yet you look at that situation and you would say so much of that hype was self-induced by Manchester United and Adidas and the way he was introduced. It was all a little bit silly. I think it was very easy to get invested in it and enjoy it. I think also it set him up for such a difficult position because actually, if you look at his time at Juventus, a lot of the success he enjoyed was because of those around him as well. It really wasn't individual ability, I think, that always helped him. It was the fact that he had a good infrastructure. And he's kind of arrived into a club that doesn't have that in Manchester United at this precise moment. The midfield, I would say, isn't built around him in the same way that Juventus did with Vidal and Pirlo and giving him a platform to really succeed. So I think moving forward, they need to find that for him. I think they need to find the best role for him. That's the one, I think, piece of naivety in this deal for me is that they've bought a player that realistically they haven't thought, well, who goes around him? They've just expected him to come in and raise the level, which is understandable to a degree. But like I say, I think it's also very naive.
One rumor that's gaining some traction, at least in this part of the world where we are, Christian, is the fact that Bob Bradley may be linked to a job in Swansea. I know the job's not technically open yet, but certainly with the start that they've had, there is some concerns about that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are, because as someone who follows the game on both sides of the Atlantic, what your thoughts are on Bob Bradley and whether or not you think that he would be successful if he were to get an opportunity in the Premier League.
I think he would. I'm personally quite a big fan of Bob. I was lucky enough to chat to him for about an hour last year for 442 as part of a list of the top 50 managers at this precise moment. So he's someone that I enjoy. I think he's very good with players. I think he sort of walks the line of disciplinarian and motivated very well. I think he's always wanted to go to the Premier League. He made no kind of bones about that previously in his career to interviews to colleagues of mine like Joe Prince at NBC. The thing that I wonder about with him is, does he jump for this because it's the first, I would argue, major opportunity he's had, or does he hold off? Because one of the things that stuck out to me when I did speak to him was he wanted a club that had a culture to it. He wanted a club that had a real kind of deep-rooted identity. That's why he went to Le Havre, because it has that academy, because it has that real footprint in French football. I'm not sure if that's the same at Swansea personally. I'm not sure if it has that same kind of identity that he wants. I know he talks very highly about Athletic Bilbao as a similar kind of situation to Le Havre in terms of having that identity, and he really enjoyed visiting them. I think it was for a film festival that he went to. So I think it would be a good move for him personally. I also think it appeals. It's just that one slight
All right.
loose thread that I have in the back of my mind when I think about him moving to Swansea.
One team that's actually struggling as we speak, Christian, is West Ham. They've been in the bottom of the table since the beginning of the season. A very highly expectations worthy season for them. New stadium, London Stadium, and more expectation of at least being a top 10 team. What do you think of West Ham's problems are right now?
I think that the stadium is a big problem. If you look at it on television, it's the pitch itself is a lot bigger than the bowling ground or Upton Park was. I think that's impacting the players. If you just look at the stadium in general, it's such a vast space as well. That changes, I think, your approach. I imagine it's easier to be nervous when you're in a ground that big and a stadium that big, because it's a new kind of place for you, it's a new kind of culture. West Ham, I was lucky enough to go there a few seasons ago. It was very tight. It was very compacted Upton Park. You could really kind of see why that siege mentality worked for them. I also think that, again, much like Chelsea, their London rivals, the signings in the summer, they weren't really that great. I think the likes of Figuli was a good bit of business. I quite like Norvite as well. But you look at Gokantor, who there's reports floating around as we speak that they're going to consider terminating his loan altogether. They had a chance for Pione Sisto, but they couldn't get him. Now, he's a player I rate exceptionally highly. I think Celta Vigo got an absolute snip in him for $5 million. But you look at the likes of Tor, you then look at Zaza, who, for me, is perhaps fifth or sixth choice for West Ham. They could have had Benteke. It's just a case of them not moving in the right avenues. I think they've spent money, of course. They've spent money. It just hasn't been on the right kind of players for the system.
Kristan, I always like to turn my attention to the championship, to the second tier. I know it's pretty early on right now, so just in a general, broad kind of question, what has impressed you early on in that season? Who might you point to as an early club to watch as a potential promotion possibility?
Well, it will sound painfully obvious because they're on top of them, but Huddersfield. I saw them very early on. They came up to Newcastle and actually emerged winners. And I wrote at the time that there was no luck about that victory for David Wagner. It was very much a solid team performance. It was founded, I think, quite heavily on industry. They were a real nuisance of a team. They didn't want to let anyone settle. They sat deep. They stayed compact. But they were organised. This wasn't 10 men behind the ball job. This was a team that knew what they wanted to do and how they wanted to stretch their opponents. And credit to Wagner, he even said afterwards, they did get that little bit of luck that they needed, and I'm inclined to agree with that. There was a few missed chances for Newcastle on the day, but you look at the results since then, they've gone on to really great things. And you know, I like a lot of what Wagner represents. I think it's nice to see an American coach succeeding. Granted, he's German-born, but an American international during his playing days. And I just like a lot of what he represents. I find him a really fascinating character, and I think if we can almost, as difficult as it might be, separate him from the identity of being Jurgen Klopp's former assistant, we could have a very interesting character developing in England, and someone that I think, honestly, will be in the Premier League at some stage in the near future, just because of the way he not only conducts himself, but the way he understands what he wants to do, and the way he can kind of squeeze the best out of what is very little at Huddersfield.
How are the Magpies doing, Kristan?
They're not doing too badly. They had a really barnstorming and heart attack-inducing win against Norwich midweek, in which they scored in the last minute. They scored twice, which was an absolute farce to watch from a distance. I think for Benitez at the minute, it's very much about finding the path. He knows what he wants to do. I think he He knows what he wants the players to do, but there are just little intricacies and little idiosyncrasies that need to be conveyed and understood before they can really get that momentum. They've had, like I say, some really great results, beating Norwich 4-3, hammering QPR 6-0, but they've been interset with defeats against Wolves and defeats to Fulham and little slip-ups that really, if you would argue it before the match, when you look at the two teams on paper, they should be winning those games.
All right, Kristan, as always, we thank you for your time. We never have enough of it. Lots of storylines to talk about over there, and we'll get you back soon enough to touch on those clubs that we didn't get to today. So if you're a fan of those, we apologize, but there's a lot to talk about. Kristan, anything you want to plug before we say goodbye, though?
At the minute, I've just written something on Nicholas Bentner and his precocious talent. He was once hailed as the best 18-year-old in England, and now he's in the second tier trying to fight to start his career again. So there's that, and then we'll also be having something on the other hazard. Hopefully that should be something decent for your listeners to read.
All right, cheers. Thanks again.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
What is it, Kevin, about Canada and indirect free kicks in the box?
I don't know. Cameroon. We're joking because Canada won 1-0. We talk about the U17 World Cup here, Women's U17 World Cup in Jordan. After 2 minutes, Canada goes 1-0, and they miss a sitter, Lyranesque miss, by Canada, and then indirect free kick in the box.
Yeah, it was it was an illustration of how the U17 level can be a little chaotic sometimes. We'll be nice about how we say it. It was a mental error by the keeper to pick up what was clearly a back pass. It was the correct call by the referee. This wasn't a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 situation. It was clearly a back pass that she just forgot about or something. I did like a brain fart. The pressure of the moment got to her.
She touched it, then she picked it up, and then she put it back. I was like, ah.
Yeah, and it was a pretty dangerous situation there, all in all. But nonetheless, it's 1-1. Canada's been in the front foot of this. By the time you listen to this, the podcast listeners, it's be all done. So we'll move on from that.
Speaking of podcasts, it's International Podcast Day here, September 30th. And I want to say thanks to Kristan for being on the show. One of the first podcaster I've ever listened to with EPL Talk back in the day. And I want to say thanks for being on, Kristan, on International Podcast Day.
He's always easy to get a hold of, always good with his time. He'll do any interview with anyone really out there. So if you're out there, not to plug competition, but competition is good. If you're out there trying to start your own podcast, Kristan will probably come on. So just ask him. He's pretty open that way, and he's always has good insight. Follows the game on both sides of the Atlantic, as we said, and that's something that's not, especially over there. It's rare to find. It's easy to find people over here that follow it on both sides. It's not so easy on that part of the world. So exactly. That's good for him, and it shows that he's open to the game everywhere, right?
Well, speaking of games and Premier League and over there, what are your thoughts on Wednesday? No Aguero, no De Bruyne. How do you approach this game against Spurs, which clearly are going to be a contender this year? Maybe not to the extent of last year, who knows, but with the Harry Kane injury and situation. But it's all on Dele Alli and the gang to propel this team forward in a big match at home against Man City Sunday.
Yeah, certainly it's right, top of the table clash, I suppose, but it's still a little early to be talking in those terms. City, and I said this against Swansea, I tweeted it out at the time as I watched, that the way to play City is to attack City. If you sit back, the way that they play right now and the way that they work the ball and the way that they move off the ball, this is kind of a change from the past with them too, where you could bunker down and get them on the counter for one of your only chances. But if you sit back now under Pep, they will break you down. They have shown that consistently over the first half of the season, that they will punish teams that will sit back on them. So what you have to do is get on the front foot. And I think Spurs is a club that is capable of that. Now, Spurs has their own injury problems to worry about as well. So there is that. But nonetheless, it should be a cracker, to use the term, right? Like it is too, in a very intriguing matchup early on. City will want to go 7-0 to start the season. to solidify the top of that table. The little hiccup on Wednesday, I slipped. It was a Freudian slip in the middle of the interview with Christian when I called it a loss. It wasn't a loss. They actually drew the game that was on the road. So a point on the road isn't the end of the world within the Champions League. I think that most observers will suggest that it's still probably going to be Barcelona City at the top, even with that 1 point drop, because by and large, there's still already is a gap of 3 points there. So nonetheless, it will come down to those two games against Barcelona. And what the slip up means basically is that you have to either hope that Barcelona drops points in Scotland, which doesn't seem likely, or that you sweep Barca. So I think that what it's done, and it's unfortunate, is it's kind of made City, it's unfortunate for me, it might be fortunate for you depending on your perspective on them. It's made them likely to finish second in the group, which will make that round of 16 match tough. But hey, you got to beat all comers to win the damn thing. So that's kind of where I come down on that, and where I come down in the championship right now. So certainly that Sunday morning game, is going to be highly intriguing, as I said.
No, very, very intriguing. Yes, I am concerned with Hull and Chelsea. Who knows with Chelsea's form right now? Hull had actually a good beginning of the season, the first few games, so we'll see what happens there. Sunderland and David Moyes, it's not looking good. Maybe West Bromwich Albion can actually get a win on the road. Who never know? But a few interesting matchup in the weekend and Sunday. Arsenal, Burnley. I wouldn't be surprised to see Arsenal continue to have a very good season.
Yeah, Arsenal's always good. I mean, that's the problem with people have with Arsenal is that they haven't won championships, not that they aren't good, right? And that's just an expectation thing. I want to go back to the Chelsea situation. What we're seeing, I think, this year is with the inconsistencies that they've had is perhaps that, a lot of blame was placed on the distractions that were swirling around Mourinho last year. And I think that played a role. Certainly the way that they played last year was so incredibly disappointing and confusing at times.
Being champions and having a similar squad to the champion of the year before. Yeah, it was what the hell happened there.
Yeah, but I do think that what we're maybe perhaps seeing is that there were deeper problems than just Mourinho's distractions. And it's going to take more than a year to turn that around, and that Chelsea probably will be focused more on trying to get back into that Champions League spot. Such a key, those top four positions. It sort of becomes... we make fun of Arsenal for the fourth place trophy jokes, but certainly those fourth place, they are incredibly important, and it's going to be a battle royale all year to try and get those final spots, because you have Liverpool on the up and up, you have Chelsea kind of, we don't know what they are. United seems a little bit better. Obviously, City's good. Spurs is in there. And you can't, I tend to not think Leicester has much of a chance to do it, but you can't ignore them. They did win the championship last year.
Exactly.
So.
They're defending champion, and that brings some sort of respect that you have to consider them still, even though right now they're in the bottom of the table. Not at the bottom, but towards the bottom.
Yeah, precisely. And there's the bottom too. I mean, people, the pro Rel fans love to talk about relegation races. There are some interesting teams down there.
West Ham in 18th position, Stoke in 19th, and Sunderland. But I'm not really worried for Stoke because they're going to draw their way to 17th, that's for sure. But the other teams, it could be concerned. And you have Middlesbrough and Bournemouth. Bournemouth were able to survive last year. We'll see how this year is. But no, it's going to be a battle down there too.
Maybe it'll be the year we finally get rid of Sunderland.
Well, I get the Black Cats, 20th right now with David Moyes. He doesn't know what he's doing. They're the Premier League's cockroach team, though. And what I mean by that is, if you're a Sunderland fan, they survive. They would survive a nuclear blast. They're going to finish 16th, 17th every damn year. Never provide much entertainment in the league, but they'll never leave. That's why I was saying Stoke. Because Stoke used to just, with Peter Crouch, just draw their way to a safe spot, and then that's probably going to happen this year. But it's so close though, because you have Duane. They're all on 6 points from the 6 game played, and they're all close to each other still down there. So just a few points here and there, and you have a big difference. You have 1 point for Sunderland, 2 for Stokes, 3 for West Ham. Anybody wins, and they jump 3-4 spots. Yeah,
it's why it's too early to be talking about too much of anything. You could win. what the adage is you can't win the Premier. Like, this is any league. You can't win the league in the early part of the season, but you can lose it. And that's ultimately what, we talk about this in Major League Soccer as well. You just don't want to lose touch. And certainly you just don't want to get buried at the bottom. That's what happened to Villa last year. I mean, Villa was terrible. That's also what happened to Villa last year. But
I think that's the most important thing is Villa was terrible last year.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. We're going to touch on some supporter stuff in the next block that is starting to draw attention.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And welcome back. Sweet Sounds of St. Clair. They have a new single out, by the way. We might give it a little bit of a rollout next week to let you hear it, and encourage you to download those. They're friends of the podcast, friends of the soccer world. Kevin, there's an issue going on here in Toronto, and I'm always very reluctant to talk about these supporters' issues on this show because I don't want to make it about them all the time. But this is something that's starting to get attention across the league. There's a Reddit conversation on it, certainly a lot of chatter on Twitter and things like that. And for those that aren't completely familiar with it, this is what's happening. I'll set the stage, and then we'll have a more general conversation about some of these issues. In Toronto, there is a supporters group called the Inebriati that have become notorious for both good and bad reasons, I think is a fair way to say it. They provide a lot of atmosphere in the stands. They're particularly loud and rambunctious in the stands, a lot of drumming, a lot of flags. They're the ones that basically started the Iceland clap, for lack of a better way to call it, at the BMO, although it started this year, I should say. The slow clap has been there for years.
I call it the Iceland contribution to the world of soccer.
Yes, there you go. It's a slow clap. It's a bit different than just a slow clap. So I think that it is fair to call it something new. Anyway, so they were the ones that lead that and so on and so forth. They certainly do make the atmosphere there more rambunctious. There's no doubt about that. Now, they're also the group that got in trouble in Montreal last year, although they will deny that for the record. They still claim to this day that it wasn't them necessarily, that there's no proof that it was their members. They're also in the section, and this is important wording that I'm using here. They were also the group that shared the section with the infamous blowjob banner that got the fans in hot water in August this year.
Where this issue started, because we're talking about this issue itself started with that Tuesday that appeared with the Montreal win in Toronto.
Precisely, yeah. That's what's coming.
The lewd depiction of a TFC supporter drinking beer, having a fellatio by a woman dressed in Montreal colors, but dressed in a blue, because there was no Montreal affiliation but it's just the Montreal colors, and the guy was dressed in true FC colors.
She was on her knees giving a blowjob, is what it was. Now, look, this is again the Inebriati's position, and this is something that they are suggesting that has been backed up by the person involved, who has, I should put it out, that the person who brought that banner in, I'm not sure everyone knows this, the person who brought the banner in plus another individual that was seen holding the banner in the stadium have had their season tickets revoked and have a stadium ban. So they have been punished, and I'm not sure everyone understands that, because there's a lot of talk about that. But at any rate, to get to the point at hand, the Inebriati are having a sit-down protest where they not standing during the game, they're not cheering during the game, they're just watching the game passively. And it started with the first game after they had these sanctions handed to them. The sanctions included a provision, a clause that they want them to sign, which would allow the club to collectively punish the group if something happened in their area that they control. Without necessarily having to demonstrate that the individual that did the act that was deemed punishable was necessarily in that group. So basically, they're enforcing self-policing, is what the club would be arguing here. That if they're arguing that you should have self-policing, that if anything happens in that section, that's just going to be a blanket punishment for the group, regardless of whether or not that person actually was in. So the group would then say, how can we stop someone from just wandering into our section and holding up an offensive banner? what are we supposed to do? So like, even if a guy comes in for 2 seconds, holds another blowjob banner up, like blowjob banner 2, and causes more offense, that then we're just going to get punished, even if that person was just someone that was trying to, blank with us, right? That's kind of their argument. So they're having this protest. They're sitting down. It started with 55 minutes. They've increased it by 5 minutes each game. They intend to increase it by 5 minutes until the final game of the season, which would take it up to 85 minutes, I believe, if you do the math. So certainly it is having it is being noticed in the stadium. There's for sure, it is quieter in the South End without their presence in there. There's no doubt about that. Locally here, there had been an article in the Toronto Star and in the Toronto Sun that have taken kind of different approaches to it. The Toronto Sun, Kurt Larson, was quite critical of the actions by Inebriati, saying that it was hurting the club. Laura Armstrong of the Toronto Star, formerly the Toronto Star, unfortunately, she's a layoff. She got caught in some layoffs today, actually, and we do wish Laura the best if she's out there listening.
Jesus.
Yeah, the industry is terrible right now. At any rate, and she was a good reporter, and she did a very balanced
She's been on the show before. So.
Yeah, she has been on the show before, and she did a very good balanced approach to this issue. And I encourage you to go read that article, which appeared in the Toronto Star yesterday, which I think might be her last article for them. Anyway, so that was a good take that was on that. So there's a lot of stuff here to unpack, and I've been asked to give my opinion on this, and I will quickly do it. Is I think that I tweeted out my best analogy was that I think that the front office is using a sledgehammer to kill an ant. And they are using a sledgehammer to kill an ant that they created and used to market itself. And that's always my issue with heavy-handedness when it comes to supporters groups interactions, is that they are happy to show the images out there to market the club, but yet they sometimes try and control those groups a little bit more, which does beg the question, Kevin, and kind of, you're welcome to give your opinion on this if you want specifically to the issue, but I thought we'd have more of a general conversation in terms of what the role of supporters groups are in the new MLS and MLS 3.0, because that is the worry that's being talked about across the league, is that MLS, now that they've taken advantage of these groups to help build their brand, and now that they're getting whatever millions of dollar expansion fees out there, they don't need them anymore, and they're going to be cast aside. That's the worry out there, Kevin.
Well, just to speak on the issue itself, blaming the whole for individual effort has never been really work in the entire society as philosophy, like as a principle. So that applies here. I don't think the many should be punished for the few. Unfortunately, sometimes there's no other choices, no other recourse. I get that, but I kind of understand why the protest is there, is for that clause. That being said, you do have to a certain limit that you don't cross where on what you can and can't say or show on a banner, on a flag, or whatever the case may be. Like, you not have like a Nazi sign. We'll all agree that that's just not possible. So you have to make a certain control on that. So this is self-policing the best way to go, and it's always interesting. And from my experience too, it's always like there becomes a sort of mentality of us against everybody else, and there's started to be confrontational, especially when you talk about security and everything surrounding that. So it's always a very difficult issue to pinpoint where it all goes wrong when it does. But it's always very difficult to try to make everybody happy in a situation like this.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's very difficult even when you generally agree with the basis of the current action, which I do generally agree, because I do think that the clause that they're being forced to sign is a bit heavy-handed. I still, at the same time, do also understand the obligation that the club has for the entire environment. And look, I don't like, there's that term that we all like to hear, or that we all hear nowadays, like safe spaces and things like that. And I've had that given back to me or thrown back at me when I've discussed this issue, is that the BMO needs to be a safe place for people. Look, and that's going to make some people applaud when they hear terms like that. And it's going to make some people scream when they hear terms like that, because, is it the club's responsibility to shelter the world from anything that may be deemed offensive to anyone? And we're getting a little beyond soccer when we talk about that. So, look, the banner was wrong and it's been punished. So I think that should be enough. I do think there is cause to have provided some kind of slap on the wrist for a few games in terms of not allowing flags in there, because that's clearly what the issue came from. I do think that it does beggars belief a little bit that there wasn't any knowledge of that banner within that section, and that's always where I've come down on that.
Basically, what we're saying, Duane, what I'm saying is, don't use every little opportunity the club has. Like the club itself, do not use one little incident to get your point through and get your agenda, if you have one, or get your end goal, what you really wanted to happen, started there. No, the offense has to be worth it. If there's a big brawl and 20 people comes at the hospital, yeah, it will be a different story there. We're not talking about this right now.
Yeah, look, and there's a couple other facts to this. Again, anyone listening out there within the supporters culture, you know damn well that I am closer to that than I am to the corporate world. I kind of sometimes play down the middle a little bit more than some of you might, but nonetheless, I am closer to the world of the supporters groups. I am a member of U-Sector. I paid money I donated money, I should say, to the banner that went up for the TIFO on that same day, the good TIFO. My girlfriend was part of the planning committee for that TIFO, so I am in that world. That said, I also am someone who in the past worked in a jail and understand the need for people to take responsibility for their action. And I sometimes see across, and I'm not just talking about inebriety here, I'm talking about throughout the history, and that includes my own group at times where...
And supporters in general, because that includes different. Same for Montreal, for Vancouver, we've seen this happen with the Ultras in Montreal, with the Curva Collective. We've seen those situations arose, not just across MLS, but across the world.
Yeah, and there is an element of that. Now, it does beg the question, I guess, to get this general, and I go back to my what's their role? What are supporters going to do moving forward? Are they going to get pushed out? Does MLS need supporters groups anymore? And I think that the supporters groups will say yes, and the reason they'll point to is exactly what's happening in BMO. It is, they'll say dead, but it's deader for sure in that section. But the question is, do we require constant singing? Do we require smoke? Do we require capo stands? All of those things that we now take for granted within Major League Soccer, are they required for that branding to continue? And I'm not entirely convinced that everyone in Major League Soccer agrees that they are. In fact, I think the evidence is out there that there's a lot of teams that are...
What's the most watched league in the world?
Premier League.
What's the supporters' status over there? How are the capo stands? How are the flags?
Well, exactly. The English would reject capo stands, and there's no flags really.
But you know what I mean. Exactly. There's no more flags. It's everybody's sitting basically, because that's a rule. You have to sit, and you basically have some chanting. Yeah, but it's not like it used to be. Anfield is Anfield, but the Cup is not what the Cup used to be.
Yeah. No. They have. There is some element of especially the way fans tend to be able to stand, but by and large, if you listen to any Premier League game right now, most of the noise you hear is from the away sections, regardless of who's playing. That's not a diss on any particular team anywhere, right? That outside of a few notable places, that Crystal Palace has a small section that would be deemed ultra, I would imagine. If you know what I mean there, you look up in Scotland, there's a couple teams up there that have kind of sections similar to what you'd have there. But no, it isn't necessarily the commercial interests of the teams in any way. In fact, I would say that there are some teams in Major League Soccer that are doing it by they're forced to. So you have to be careful. You have to tread lightly on this if you're a supporters group, because I do think that particularly, I don't think they're ever going to reject them outright. I think it is part of the DNA at this point of the league, but they may reject groups like Inebriati, and I'm saying like Inebriati, not Inebriati specifically, if anyone from the group is listening, groups that are closer to the edge, and I think that they would agree that they're closer to the edge than certainly some of the other groups at BMO Field, in favor of those other groups. To put it directly into TFC terms, I could definitely see if Inebriati pushes this and takes this to its logical end goal, which is to leave the stadium and put their support elsewhere. With the Canadian Premier League coming up, there might be an opportunity for that. What TFC would likely do, is that they would likely hand those tickets over to RPB, which is the big tent group that exists within BMO Field. And you could see that, where you have more control over the groups. And that's more of the fear that a lot of the other groups that did lend their support to the silent protest in the last game, where they also didn't sing for X amount of time. RPB came in at the Dicchio song. youth sector came in a little bit later along with Kings. Certainly by the end of the game, all the groups, including Inebrati, were back involved. But I could just definitely see them moving to a situation where they require supporters groups to be like Big Ten groups, like RPB, and there's very similar groups across the league where you have registration,
Third
where you have
rail,
lists,
Emerald City supporters, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, you have lists, you have registration, the club knows who they are. It's a lot more controlled. And that's something that, like, and again, my group, we reject the idea that we should provide a list to the front office. Always have. We are an older version of Inebriati. We're just old and grumpy now, as opposed to them who are young and vibrant and sing more. That's really what it comes down to. The groups are kind of different. They're just at different stages of their development. So I understand their feeling. They're like independence that they want. But I think that the danger comes if you push too hard back on stuff like this, that you may lose that independence, and you may be forced, if you want to be in those areas, to be part of those Big Ten groups. And that's the worry. I don't know. This is people ask me to talk about this, so I have. Yeah, that's what I have to say. Anything else before we take a break?
Let's take a break and come back with our games of the week. You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back. Kevin.
Yes.
Why don't you list those games and we'll have a chat about them?
All right, let's talk about Major League Soccer this weekend. You know, it's a weekend very important for a lot of different reasons, especially the Eastern Conference playoff with the Revolution battling for a spot, DC United, Montreal, and Philadelphia in fourth. Now, who knows what's possible tonight, September 30th. Houston, which are pretty much out of the conversation, against New York City FC. And tomorrow, the Red Bulls at Philadelphia. Philly can grab the fourth place for good with the victory on the road, but the Red Bulls are battling for the top of the East.
Yeah. What's nice about the standings right now is that we're at the point of the season where there's very little games in hand out there anymore. So we have a better idea of how all those games in hand shook out. That game tonight, which you would have to think that NYCFC would look at it as a necessary win if they are to win the top of the East and get that bye. And it's so vital, as we've talked about, those 3 teams within 1 point at the top of the East looking for 2 spots that will get them out of that win and die game, or win or die game, I should say. So that one is a great way to start the week. And Houston, the question with Houston is, are they the worst team in the league, or is it Chicago? I mean, that's kind of the debate here. Although that said,
Columbus can give a run to their money too. We'll see. We'll see on Saturday between Columbus and Chicago.
Yes, there's a battle royale there. Second time I use that term.
Royale, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, Houston has managed a couple upsets over the course of the season because it is Major League Soccer and you can't let your gas off the pedal at any particular point, or you may get burnt. So certainly that is an interesting matchup too, to make this TFC centric for a second, is that TFC DC United game on Saturday, because DC United is red hot right now, and they are the team that, if they sneak into that spot in the bottom seeds, and right now with New England kind of dropping a bit behind, it looks like they might. I don't think you want to play them as that 3rd seed, because they can pull the upset off, and we're going to see a bit of a preview of that this weekend as a potential matchup in that knockout round, exactly where it would be too. I think TFC is very likely to finish 3rd at the worst at this point, so they would have that home playoff game, but nonetheless, DC, as I said, is a hot team right now. So that would be one of the more interesting games of the week too. Kevin, what are your thoughts on Montreal this week?
Montreal Sunday, they have Orlando, and it just came out today that Asun Kamara is suspended too. If you go back to the game on Wednesday, at Stade Saputo against the Quakes. At the 80th minute, Kamara did a very hard tackle against Quintero at the edge of the box. It went unpunished. Kamara was already on the yellow at that point. On that game, they gave him a yellow after the fact, which means he gets suspended for the next game, which is Sunday. So you have Cabrera suspended for yellow accumulation as well, and Donny Toya injured. 3 of the 4 starters of the backline for Montreal are out at the moment. Laurent Simon, who is going to join him? Is Wandré Lefebvre fit and ready to come back? Do you have a Fisher? You need to put a body. You need to put body in there. So Cal Fisher, Lefebvre, and company. We'll see youngsters maybe play at that position. Whatever the Impact can do, because this Sunday against Orlando, it's not going to be easy for the defense of Montreal.
Yeah, moving on down the ride, that's the Sunday game as well. The second Sunday game, it's a double Canadian header on the weekend with Seattle and Vancouver playing, again, another Cascadia matchup. Do they play every week, Cascadia matchups? It seems that way.
Oh, yeah, because, there's 3 of them, so there's always one that's probably happening every week.
Yeah, well, that and the LA-Seattle thing between those 2 games, it's like every week they seem to be the featured game. At any rate, that's probably the West Coast bias of MLS. I do actually think people always talk about East Coast bias. Yeah, in MLS, I think it's Cascadia bias.
Well, the world itself, Duane, is that there's a study on this that the influence is New York, right? But over the years, it's going to become LA. So you'll see things start. You already started. Things don't start at 7 anymore. They start at 8, right?
Yeah. Well, it's
slowly it's going to be 9.
Baseball playoffs start at 9.
Yeah. Well, why do you think? West Coast audience, and it's starting to, believe me, 10 to 15 years in the world of media, at least, the influence won't be New York anymore. It's going to be LA, because Hollywood is TV now. Let's face it.
Yeah, there you go. But Seattle, again, now above the red line for the first time forever this season. Jordan Morris having a great little run of form right now. We talked about Dempsey earlier this week. Morris's form is allowing the Seattle fans to recover from that a little bit easier, I think. So that is some good news for them there. Not much to play for the Whitecaps right now. If they were to lose that game, I do believe mathematically they can be eliminated this weekend. They may even mathematically be out of it by the time this game kicks off. So there's spoilers is what they're at there. Now, that said, it is a rivalry matchup for them, and I'm sure that motivation to be a spoiler, and certainly the motivation is Carl Robinson apparently has laid down the law in Vancouver that they're playing for their jobs now, although he may be coaching for his as well. So there is that. So we'll see. So that's an interesting matchup at the end of the week. But I do think that the other one worth mentioning on this is the FC Dallas LA game. Obviously, LA right now quietly has creeped its way back into the point where
the Galaxy will Galaxy, Dwayne. Winning at the end of the season, getting into the playoff hot with Donovan scoring. Galaxy is going to Galaxy.
Yeah. So if they can win that game, it puts the Supporters' Shield back on the table. I would argue that for LA, I think, and I'm not talking about Toronto right now. We'll revisit that if they get within a game at one point, but I think it's done there. As I said, if the Galaxy can close this a little bit with the way Dallas finishes the season, I could see the Galaxy catching up and being that the team that can steal that thing that no one expected down the earth, and the MLS soccer.com can put 17 articles out about Landon Donovan. It'll be a wonderful thing for all of us involved that aren't American U.S. men's national team fans. We'll just enjoy that greatly. The talk about you and Landon Donovan constantly in this league. Anyway, that is a good game. Beyond that, I mean, jokes aside, that's a hell of a game, and it's a great way to end your Saturday night. So when that TFC game ends at 7:30, if you're a TFC fan, run back to the pub and have a look at that one. Get it on your phone or whatever you can. Yeah. It's not on Canadian TV, so
there was some game Wednesday in the NASL, and there's some game this weekend too. USL playoff starts in the weekend, so keep an eye for the USL playoffs. Wednesday, Jacksonville and Eddies 0-0. The Eddies haven't scored in 5 straight games.
Yeah, it's the old problem is new again with the Eddies, and they're going to need to find a way to score in the playoffs to have a chance. Although, they could win the Soccer Bowl with 2 straight 0-0s and win in penalties both times. So that might be their strategy at this point in time. But
Railhawks 0, Cosmos 2, Puerto Rico 2, Fort Lauderdale Strikers 1, Miami 2, Ottawa 1. Those were the games on Wednesday. This weekend, Tampa Bay, Miami on Saturday, Minnesota, Jacksonville on Saturday as well. Sunday, Ottawa, Puerto Rico. Cosmos versus Fort Lauderdale Strikers, FC Edmonton versus the Indy 11, and Rayo OKC versus Carolina Railhawks.
We want much longer to sing that, unfortunately.
I don't think we're gonna.
Yeah.
How many games left? There's 3 weeks left, 4 weeks left.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, they end a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
We'll give some more attention. We'll have another NASL show probably for the soccer bowl, particularly the Canadian team in there. You did mention the USL playoffs. I think maybe we should quickly go through that for those that didn't listen to our Wednesday show. If you are interested in the USL playoffs, and there is a bit of Canadian content in this in terms of players that are playing, coaches that are coaching, and obviously there's one team based in Canada that are in these playoffs. So quickly to go through them. In the Western Conference, the 1 versus 8 matchup is Sacramento, who did manage to get the top seed in the West and once again are looking to be poised to potentially win another title. They are playing the OC Blues, which was my preseason pick to win. So they're in the playoffs, so there's still a chance. Swope Park Rangers are the 2-7 matchup. They're playing LA. LA2 was my pick to win last week when I redid this before the playoffs. So there you go. The Colorado Springs Switchblacks, they are playing. That's the Canadian content that I talked about. The Whitecaps, too, did get into the playoffs in that 3-5 matchup. So that's certainly something to watch there. If you're a Whitecaps fan, it might even be more interesting for you if you're a Whitecaps fan to watch that one.
Sorry to interrupt, Duane. We'll continue in a second with the USL playoff bracket. Breaking news concerning the Montreal Impact. Laurent Simon has been called up for the World Cup qualifiers in the Belgium squad. We'll see how that affects the Montreal Impact roster in the following weeks with a backline already jeopardized. We'll see what the future has in store for Montreal's defense.
Yeah, this is the international break that the clubs just cross their fingers on. That they put a gritted teeth press release out when they get released. Great, he's going.
Laurent Simon's going to play for Belgium in that weekend.
All right, the Toros. They are affiliated with Houston. They are playing OKC Energy, the other OKC team, the one that has apparently won the battle for the hearts of Oklahoma City. That's the 4-5 matchup in the West. In the East, Kevin, the Red Bulls, too, which a lot of people are pegging as a potential champion. As
regular season champion in the whole league. Yeah, regular season for the second year in a row in the regular season for both conferences. So.
It's an all-2 matchup, so they're playing, although they call them B in Orlando because they have to be different, I guess.
Yeah, well, they play soccer. They're a soccer club, and they're Orlando B. So, yes, I would have to say that you are correct.
Yeah, so Orlando and New York are in an all MLS 2 matchup in the 1-8. The Rochester Rhinos, we talked about them. They're in the 2-7 matchup against the Charlotte Independents, which is a team that has had a sneaky solid season. FC Cincinnati, which are the darlings off the pitch this year in USL. If you haven't seen that story, I don't know what rock you're under, but nonetheless, open up and watch that one. That's the one I might watch if any game you're going to watch this week in the USL, and all these are available on YouTube for free. They're playing Charleston, so that's a classic matchup between probably the most historic team in the USL, in my opinion, the Charleston Battery, an iconic brand there in that league at that level, and FC Cincinnati, which, as I said, are the new boys in town that are packing that stadium, 20,000 to watch USL soccer, which blows your mind when you've been out to an FC Montreal or a Toronto FC 2 game, and you think about 20,000 people watching the same level.
Yeah.
Then the final matchup, the 4-5, is Louisville versus Richmond, which Richmond is another one of those historic teams there. Louisville's a little bit newer. They've had a solid season, some Canadian content on that team as well. Kevin, any final thoughts on the week?
Well, Vancouver made the playoff, but it's the Vancouver 2. So at least there's some positive in Vancouver.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to be able to promise to be able to watch all 8 of these matchups because that's a lot of soccer when I have other things that I need to do and MLS to follow and League One games to work. But I will certainly make a point to watch, and I'm sure Kevin will as well, to watch enough of this that we will have a more fuller conversation about the USL playoffs on our USL Wednesday show this week. So look forward to that. And if you don't know, we do a USL show every Wednesday. We do a USL focus. I shouldn't say every Wednesday. Some Wednesdays there might be more pressing news that sort of bumps it a week. But nonetheless, we do look to do USL Wednesdays as part of our USL radio. You can find it on that stream as well. Kevin, on that note, as always, I'll let you say goodbye.
Until next week, stay tuned for Soccer Today, Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. on SPN Radio. And until then, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.